something to do with it, but still, 12 Dragonblade kills so far in this map. So that's just something that Seoul does sometimes. They kind of hide their players around. Maybe they get like a quick assassination where it's like a dash and a headshot.
They got the bush camouflage on their first drop map. Pretty OP. Xavier will be in. Oh, there it is! J-Lo! Didn't see that one
coming. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode in the Armchair Analyst series, where this week we're going to be breaking down the frenetic Stage 2 matchup between NYXL and Seoul Dynasty. Excitement was paramount going into this series, and rightfully so. Seoul had amassed an incredible win streak since Stage 2 commenced, whilst NYXL had remained atop the overall standings with the single most impressive map count in the league. Not to mention that both rosters are filled to the brim with incredible international talent that obviously have a long history competing alongside and against one another at the pinnacle of the competitive scene. So today we're here to analyze and discuss the factors that contributed to New York and Seoul putting on what was undeniably one of the most entertaining matches in the history of competitive Overwatch. These factors can be broken down into three primary categories: exclusive strategies, unorthodox compositions, and it wouldn't truly be high-level Overwatch without some astonishing individual skill being put on display. Let's not waste any time and jump right into dissecting the first topic. Exclusive strategies. Let's first define exactly what is meant by that. More often than not throughout the Overwatch League, teams will rely upon their own strengths to get them through matchups. Players at the peak of the scene intrinsically know what compositions work well against others and are able to assess situations accordingly, adapting when need be. Considering the exceptionally rigorous and lengthy schedule of the league in its current form, there is simply no feasible way in which teams could devise a unique plan for every single match throughout the season. That would involve watching more tape of previous matches and scrims than actually refining in-game skills and team coordination. That's definitely where coaches and analysts come into effect, however certain matchups require more attention than others, and that's where we see exclusive strategies come into play. Initially exemplified here by Seoul in the first map of the series, having the knowledge of former NYXL defensive efforts in mind, Seoul are all too aware of their opposition's favoured setup. In the past, NYXL have chosen to split their team across point A, leaving both healers far away from their entry choke point. Conscious of this tendency, on their very first push, Seoul immediately hug the wall and wrap around the point to the current position of the healers, forcing them to move out of their comfortable position and invoking a slight shift in tactics from New York. In the midst of adjustment, Mano is somehow picked off by Munchkin as we can see NYXL all but bottle up into a single field of view slightly off the point, enabling Seoul to pick up the first tick and then some. A single flanker in the form of Munchkin is all that's required to crumble the defensive setup as he forces an out-of-sorts NYXL onto the point where the rest of his team can clean up the easy offerings. Conversely, after an absurd amount of back and forth action where both teams repeatedly captured point B, it was Seoul's final attempt to even out the scoreboard. As we can see in the slight intermission between rounds, NYXL are devising a plan on the fly, something they think could throw Seoul off their game. At this point, with only a minute on the clock for Seoul, it's wise to assume that they would want to stick with what has been working for them thus far, the same composition that allowed them to capture point A twice already in this map. NYXL were correct in their gamble and positioned themselves in an incredibly unique setup outside of the initial choke point. This is an exclusive strategy that A, hadn't been seen in the league up until this point, and B, most likely won't be seen again for quite some time as it simply won't work out against most. Especially if you don't have Sabiorbi and Libero leading the charge here, a duo with a collective 46 final blows thus far in the match, a statistic that lends credibility to this devious setup. As you can see in this attempt here a mere week following the series, this cunning Oceanic DPS player was shut down before he even had time to react.
What? How did he know he was there?
This is a one-time strategy that Elite Competition know to scout out after just a single solid execution. Back to the play at hand, however, we can see that no one on the side of the Dynasty are wise to this play, and why should they be? No one in the league has ever attempted this before. NYXL clearly brought it out for this specific moment in time. In just a split second, both DPS players select their target and execute on the plan. A single pick is enough to cause an absolutely gargantuan ripple effect, as now, that kill chews into the already severely limited time on the clock for Seoul in this attacking phase. Not to mention that it all but stunts any hopes of Seoul building towards a transcendence for the final engagement, as Jaehong's average charge time throughout this series clocked in at 119 seconds on average throughout this battle on Hanamura. As Mr. X points out in these closing moments, the pick is one thing in and of itself, but it has far more of an effect than what meets the eye, as now Seoul are in panic mode. They know that this is their final attempt and are scrambling to make a go of it. Ultimately, as we well know, it was NYXL who walked away with the first map win in this series, in large part due to their incredibly bold, exclusive strategy in this final phase. The second point when breaking down this series focuses on unorthodox compositions. Now, whilst an argument can be made for this bleeding into the observations made when discussing counter-strats and compositions, it's worthy of separate discussion as the intent is often different in this regard. Unorthodox compositions are a rarity throughout the league and are often seen as a last-ditch effort by many in an attempt to stall out a payload, for instance. Alternatively, quick decisions are often made in order to completely throw the opposing team off their game. We saw it when the LA Gladiators decided to focus their composition around hydration on the Doomfist in their winning effort against the Florida Mayhem. In all likelihood, we can assume that these are compositions never revealed during scrims with other teams, meaning that it can completely bamboozle the team across the stage. We can see glimpses of such unique opposition throughout the series in discussion today. Kicking things off on the first phase of Nepal, Seoul chose to organize around a unique composition, one that saw the light of day on Horizon Lunar Colony throughout Stage 1, but soon faded out of competition for the most part, that composition being the Slambulance, wherein, 3 or in rare instances such as this, 4 tanks are rushed onto an objective thanks to a speed boost from Lucio, whilst Moira generates her coalescence obscenely fast as she heals through bodies and keeps 4 beefy tanks alive. This is one of those tactics that no team could have prepared to play around in the very first engagement. Running a 4-tank Slambulance on the Sanctum phase of Nepal is utterly unheard of. Underscoring just how rare this maneuver is from Seoul, it's worth noting that Jaehong currently sits at under a single hour of playtime on Moira in the entire Overwatch League. This statistic is absolutely dwarfed by his 14.5 hours of playtime on Zenyatta in comparison, especially significant considering his 93% Zenyatta pick rate on Nepal this season. Rushing immediately beyond the capture point, Seoul go for the surprise play here as they steamroll directly into New York. This type of positioning entirely favours their beefy yet extremely agile setup. Widowmaker is rendered all but useless and Libero is mostly negated as Seoul press on into the room. Yes, they momentarily give up the point in the process, but it's Seoul who win the fight overall, forcing out an early swap in composition as Mano goes over to Winston and Sabiolbi to the Tracer, a difficult target for the tanks to deal with. This was clearly an unexpected engagement that most teams in the league would have fallen to in that initial engagement, as did NYXL. Tied up one map apiece heading into Hollywood, we see another relatively unique tactic come into play as NYXL plays Libero on the Hanzo in their first attack. This is indeed perplexing because it turns out that Hollywood is actually the least successful map for the hero in the Overwatch League with a win rate of just under 20%. These statistics aren't infallible, however, as obviously we see certain maps as outliers with minimal time played. But nonetheless, it is still an unorthodox composition that Seoul absolutely would not have expected.
Have we seen this before? I don't think so.
More often than not, we only see the Hanzo pick early on in Hollywood simply to scout out the defensive team. A simple sonic arrow from spawn is all that's needed sometimes to assess the positioning of the opponents, however a swap typically follows shortly after. Despite the element of surprise, Seoul managed to work around the unexpected, holding New York into overtime until Libero takes matters into his own hands.
That's a huge barrage!
Now New York's turn to defend the payload, we can actually see both teams running the Moira this time around, with Seoul opting for a more traditional Slambulance composition whilst NYXL tries something unseen thus far in Hollywood. It's almost as though New York anticipate the Slambulance this time around, as we see both DPS heroes are on obviously decent counterpicks. The effort is remarkably short-lived however, as Jonak and Sabiolbi combined for a mere 3 kills all map, one of their weakest showings in the league to date, which resulted in one of the most one-sided defeats NYXL has suffered thus far. It's evident that these two teams understand one another's tendencies to such a great extent that running completely original compositions wasn't necessarily an awful idea. Whilst it eventually failed for New York, Seoul's ingenious decisions to shake things up and play compositions they might not be so well practiced on ultimately favoured them as they came out on top in both Nepal and Hollywood. Moving into our final talking point for this video, well, less of a talking point actually and more of a showreel to emphasize just how much of this series in particular rested on the shoulders of some of the greatest Overwatch players in the world. To comprehend just how evenly matched these teams are, it's fascinating to focus on the 4th battle in the series wherein the statistics were as mirrored as it comes in this scene. When the match was said and done, Both teams acquired 50 kills, Saebyeolbi and Munchkin tied at 13 eliminations in their role on Tracer, Jaehong and Jonak accrued an identical number of ultimates at 7, and all around this was just one of the most nail-biting maps you'll ever see, a testament to the level of skill and display at the pinnacle of competition. Despite matching Jonak throughout the map, it was Jaehong who captured the most highlight-worthy plays overall. In this instance, we can see Libero directly behind Seoul's support with Blade in hand. Now typically that would be considered 2 relatively effortless kills against any other team in the league, however Jaehong flicks around and shuts him down with ease, a remarkable individual showing that only continues to improve as the payload progresses. Negating Libero's Blade once more, Jaehong then goes on to find 2 more picks before wisely maximizing the effectiveness of his Transcendence. A successful Zenyatta ultimate would be one in which pivotal heroes are spared their demise. However, in this example, Jaehong rapidly communicates with Miro in order to advance directly into NYXL, bottling them up in a tight space whilst their damage is rendered all but useless. It's this caliber of intellect and improvisation that led Seoul to the second checkpoint. In an interesting moment later in the series, we can see Libero showing the utmost respect to the Zenyatta main in discussion as he deals near lethal damage, but then backs up before closing the deal. Essentially down to a melee's worth of health, Libero decides that retreating is actually the smartest move in this moment as he detects Jaehong preparing a volley of orbs. Many other Zenyatas in the league would not be shown that level of respect, especially not from one of the top DPS players. Speaking of which, it would be a crime not to shine light on how well Saebyeolbi performed throughout this entire series. 61 kills to 29 deaths. That's 10 more eliminations than the most lethal player on Seoul's roster that day, and in fact, was the second greatest number of kills he attained all stage. Pretty remarkable when considering the level of competition he was up against. Another integral component of this matchup to highlight is just how exceptionally Arc played on the Mercy. Constantly evading danger and keeping pivotal heroes in the battle, in his 30 minutes of play on the character, Arc was able to acquire just over 4.5 ultimates every 10 minutes on average. Now to contextualize that incredible pace, it's worth noting that his opposition in Toby, the Mercy main on the other side of the stage, was an entire ultimate behind in that regard. You really can't expect much more from an incredible support player when the lights are shining brightest. So overall, we can see that it was a multitude of imbricating factors that contributed to NYXL and Seoul demonstrating just what the Overwatch League is capable of. Regardless of which team you favored going in, and regardless of the outcome, it was the type of match that makes you proud to be a fan of the scene. One where every single play is as exhilarating as the last, where unique strategies are executed on by necessity, and where majorly unplayed compositions see the light of day and shake up the status quo. So that's it, that's this episode of the Armchair Analyst in the books. I hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below, let me know if something fascinating stood out to you in this series that I completely missed. But as always, thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next one.